Nirmal Purja trudged through the knee-deep snow, his crampons crunching against the icy surface. He had been climbing for hours, and the sun was beginning to set over the Himalayas. The sky was painted with hues of pink and orange, a breathtaking sight that Nirmal had grown accustomed to. Yet, he couldn't shake off the feeling of exhaustion that was creeping in. As he climbed higher, the air grew thinner, and the wind began to howl. Nirmal's team, his Sherpa guides, and his support staff were scattered around him, each one focused on their own task. Nirmal's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for the next obstacle, the next challenge to overcome. The climb to Cho Oyu was proving to be more difficult than expected. The mountain slopes were steeper than anticipated, and the weather was becoming increasingly unpredictable. Nirmal's mind was racing with calculations, weighing the risks and rewards of every move. He knew that one misstep could be disastrous, but he also knew that he couldn't afford to lose focus now. The clock was ticking and the world was watching. Nirmal's determination was unwavering, but the mountain was testing him like never before. As Nirmal's eye scanned the horizon, a sudden gust of wind buffeted him, sending his hat flying off his head. He chased after it, laughing, but his Sherpa guides, Tenzing and Pasang, quickly grasped his arms, holding him firm. "No time, Nirmal," Tenzing shouted above the wind. "We need to get moving." Nirmal nodded, his mind racing with calculations. He knew the storm was approaching fast, and they needed to find shelter before it hit. The three of them quickened their pace, trudging through the knee-deep snow as the wind howled around them. Nirmal's crampons clicked out a staccato beat on the ice, the only sound in the deafening storm. Pasang's voice was a low rumble, guiding them through the darkness, while Tenzing's words were a steady stream of encouragement. As they climbed higher, the snow grew deeper, drifting across the trail like a white ocean. Nirmal's legs ached, his muscles screaming for relief, but he pushed on, driven by a fierce determination. The storm was closing in, its icy fingers reaching out to snuff out their progress. But Nirmal refused to yield. With a final burst of energy, he led his team towards the relative safety of the next ridge. The storm raged on behind them. As they reached the relative safety of the next ridge, the storm finally began to subside. Its fury spent, Nirmal's team collapsed against the windward side of the ridge, their faces etched with exhaustion. Nirmal's eyes, however, remained fixed on the horizon, his mind still racing with calculations. He knew they couldn't afford to rest yet, not when they were so close to the summit. Tenzing and Pasang were already starting to unpack the gear, their movements swift and efficient. Nirmal's eyes roved over the landscape, searching for any sign of danger. The snow was still drifting, and the ice was slick with ice axe tips. He knew that one misstep could be disastrous. As the team began to settle in for the night, Nirmal's thoughts turned to the next phase of the climb. They needed to find a way to secure the rope, to anchor themselves to the mountain. He spotted a promising outcropping of rock and began to make his way towards it, his crampons crunching on the ice. Tenzing and Pasang followed close behind, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of admiration and concern. The night was still young, and the mountain was far from finished with them. As Nirmal approached the rocky outcropping, he spotted a narrow ledge, partially hidden by the snow. He gestured to Tenzing and Pasang, and they quickly followed, their crampons crunching on the ice. The three of them huddled together, assessing the situation. The ledge was precarious, but it offered a chance to secure the rope and anchor themselves to the mountain. Nirmal's eyes locked onto the outcropping, his mind racing with calculations. He knew that the wind could be treacherous, and the snow was still drifting. With a quiet nod, Nirmal began to work on securing the rope, his hands moving swiftly and precisely. Tenzing and Pasang watched, their faces set in determined expressions. The storm had passed, but the mountain still posed a threat. Nirmal's focus never wavered, his eyes fixed on the task at hand. As he worked, the silence was broken only by the sound of his crampons and the distant rumble of the wind. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the Himalayas. It was a beauty that Nirmal had grown to appreciate, but he knew that beauty was not enough. He needed to push on, to conquer the mountain. The rope was secured, and Nirmal's team began to prepare for the next phase of the climb. The day was young, and the mountain still had much to give. As Nirmal's team prepared for the next phase of the climb, the sun continued its ascent, casting a warm glow over the Himalayas. The air was crisp and clean, and the snow was still pristine, untouched by the storm that had raged the night before. Tenzing and Pasang were busy adjusting their gear, checking the ropes and harnesses, while Nirmal took a moment to inspect the securement system he had worked on the night before. The rope was snug against the rock face, and the anchors were solid, but Nirmal knew that the mountain was never truly secure. As he finished his inspection, Nirmal's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of danger. The snow was still drifting, and the ice was slick with ice axe tips. He spotted a small crevasse, partially hidden by the snow, and his heart skipped a beat. It was a risk, but one that he knew he had to take. With a quiet nod, Nirmal began to make his way towards the crevasse, his crampons crunching on the ice. Tenzing and Pasang followed close behind, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of concern and trust. The mountain was waiting, and Nirmal was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Nirmal navigated the treacherous ice, his crampons bit into the frozen surface, providing a fragile foothold. The crevasse yawned open before him, a deep chasm that threatened to swallow him whole. Tenzing and Pasang followed closely, their eyes fixed on Nirmal's every move. The wind whispered secrets in their ears, but Nirmal's focus never wavered. He knew that one misstep could be disastrous, but he also knew that hesitation would be fatal. With a deep breath, Nirmal began to make his way across the crevasse, his axe at the ready. The ice creaked and groaned beneath his feet, but he pressed on, his movements slow and deliberate. Tenzing and Pasang followed, their own axes at the ready, prepared to provide support if needed. As they reached the far side, Nirmal paused, his chest heaving with exertion. The crevasse stretched out before him, a seemingly endless expanse of frozen water. He gazed out into its depths, his mind racing with calculations. The rope was secure, but the mountain was still full of secrets. Nirmal knew that he had to be constantly vigilant, to anticipate every danger, to outmaneuver the mountain at every turn. And with that thought, he began to move forward, his eyes fixed on the summit, his heart fixed on the prize. As Nirmal and his team emerged from the crevasse, the snow-covered peak stretched out before them like a canvas of white. The sun was now high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the Himalayas. Tenzing and Pasang took a moment to catch their breath, their faces etched with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Nirmal, however, was already scanning the horizon, his eyes searching for the next challenge. Next phase. Pasang, Nirmal called out, his voice carrying across the snow. We need to get to the north face. Pasang nodded, his eyes already fixed on the route ahead. He began to make his way up, his crampons crunching on the ice. Tenzing followed close behind, his axe at the ready. Nirmal brought up the rear, his eyes fixed on the rope, making sure it was secure. The snow was still drifting, and the ice was slick with ice axe tips. Nirmal knew that one misstep could be disastrous. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest. The mountain was waiting, and Nirmal was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The air was thin, and the wind was picking up, but Nirmal pressed on, his determination driving him forward. He knew that the summit was within reach, but the mountain was far from easy. As Nirmal and his team ascended the north face, the snow grew deeper and the ice more treacherous. The wind howled around them, threatening to sweep them off their feet. Nirmal's focus never wavered, his eyes fixed on the route ahead. Tenzing and Pasang followed closely, their axes at the ready. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes that blinded and disoriented. Nirmal's crampons bit into the ice, providing a fragile foothold on the ever-shifting terrain. He knew every step could be his last, but he pressed on, driven by a fierce determination. Suddenly, Pasang's cry of alarm pierced the wind. Rock fall, he shouted, pointing up the mountain. Nirmal's heart skipped a beat as a massive chunk of ice broke off from the face above, hurtling towards them. Tenzing and Pasang scrambled to the side, but Nirmal stood firm, his axe at the ready. The rock hurtled past his head, mere inches from his face, and Nirmal breathed a sigh of relief. The team paused, their chests heaving with exertion. Nirmal's eyes scanned the terrain, searching for any sign of further danger. The snow was still falling, casting a veil of uncertainty over the mountain, but Nirmal knew he couldn't stop now. He had to push on, no matter what lay ahead. With a nod, he gestured for the team to continue, and they inched forward, their axes at the ready. As Nirmal and his team inched forward, the snowfall intensified, casting a thick veil of white over the mountain. The wind howled around them, threatening to sweep them off their feet, but Nirmal's focus never wavered. He scanned the terrain, searching for any sign of further danger, his eyes fixed on the route ahead. The snow was deep, drifting up to Nirmal's waist in places, and the ice was slick with ice axe tips. Tenzing and Pasang followed closely, their axes at the ready, as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Nirmal's crampons bit into the ice, providing a fragile foothold on the ever-shifting mountain. Suddenly, Pasang's cry of alarm pierced the wind once more. Ice wall, he shouted, pointing to a sheer ice face that stretched up the mountain like a frozen waterfall. Nirmal's heart skipped a beat as he assessed the situation. The ice wall was impassable, but he knew they couldn't turn back now. He called out to Tenzing and Pasang, and together they began to scan the mountain for a way around the ice wall. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes, casting a veil of uncertainty over the mountain, but Nirmal's determination never wavered. He knew they had to find a way over the ice wall no matter what it took. As Nirmal and his team frantically searched for a way around the ice wall, the snowfall showed no signs of letting up. The wind howled around them, threatening to rip them apart, but Nirmal's focus never wavered. He called out to Tenzing and Pasang, his voice barely audible over the din of the storm. "Find a route, Pasang. We can't turn back now." Pasang's face was set in a determined expression as he scanned the mountain, his eyes searching for a narrow crevice or a hidden path that could take them over the ice wall. Tenzing, meanwhile, was studying the ice face, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I think I see something, Nirmal," he shouted above the wind. "A small ledge, about 20 feet up. If we can make it to that point, we might be able to find a way around." Nirmal's eyes locked onto Tenzing's, a spark of hope igniting within them. "Let's go for it," he said, his voice low and steady. Pasang nodded, and together the three of them began to make their way up the mountain, their axes at the ready. As the storm raged on around them, the ice wall loomed ahead, a daunting challenge, but Nirmal was undaunted. He knew that with determination and teamwork, they could conquer anything the mountain threw their way. As Nirmal and his team ascended the ice wall, the snowfall showed no signs of letting up. The wind howled around them, threatening to rip them apart, but Nirmal's focus never wavered. The three climbers worked in perfect sync, their axes striking the ice with precision. Tenzing led the way, his crampons biting into the frozen surface. Pasang followed closely, his eyes fixed on Nirmal's back. Nirmal brought up the rear, his axe at the ready. The ice wall loomed above them, a daunting challenge that seemed to stretch on forever. But Nirmal's determination never faltered. He knew that with each step, they were one step closer to the summit. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes, casting a veil of uncertainty over the mountain. But Nirmal's team had been in worse conditions before. They had faced avalanches, crevices, and treacherous ice fields. This was just another obstacle to overcome. As they climbed, the ice wall began to slope upward, revealing a narrow ledge that Tenzing had spotted earlier. Nirmal's eyes locked onto the ledge, his heart racing with excitement. They were almost there. One more push, and they would be over the ice wall. But the snowfall showed no signs of letting up, and the wind howled around them like a beast. Nirmal's team dug deep, finding the strength to press on. As they emerged from the ice wall's shadow, Nirmal and his team were met with a breathtaking sight. The snow-capped peaks of Cho Oyu stretched out before them, a majestic backdrop to the stormy weather. The wind still howled, but the snowfall had begun to let up, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale light over the mountain. Tenzing and Pasang trudged forward, their legs numb but their spirits high. Nirmal followed closely, his eyes fixed on the summit. They had made it over the ice wall, and now all they had to do was reach the top of Cho Oyu. As they climbed, the terrain grew more treacherous. The snow was deep and uneven, and Nirmal had to pick his way carefully to avoid slipping. But he didn't falter, his determination driving him forward. He could see the summit looming ahead, and he knew that one final push would put them there. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence. Nirmal and his team climbed in silence, their breathing the only sound. They were close now, and Nirmal could feel the excitement building inside him. One more step, and they would be standing on the summit of Cho Oyu, one step closer to completing their impossible journey. As Nirmal and his team reached the summit of Cho Oyu, a sense of relief washed over them. They had made it, and the breathtaking view took their breath away. The snow-capped peak stretched out before them, a majestic backdrop to the stormy weather. Tenzing and Pasang let out a whoop of excitement, their faces flushed with triumph. Nirmal smiled, his eyes shining with pride. They had done it. They had conquered the highest mountain in the world, but their celebration was short-lived. Nirmal's gaze fell upon the next mountain on their list, Manaslu. It loomed before them, a towering giant of ice and rock. The team fell silent, their eyes fixed on the daunting challenge ahead. Nirmal's mind began to work overtime, calculating the logistics and planning the next move. They had come so far, but the journey was far from over. The weather was still unpredictable, and the terrain grew more treacherous by the day. Nirmal's thoughts turned to the record they were trying to break. He knew that every mountain was a challenge, and every climb a risk, but he also knew that they had come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath, he turned to his team and began to outline the plan. "We'll take a rest day tomorrow," he said, his voice steady. "Then we'll move on to Manaslu. We'll make it happen, team. We'll make it happen." As Nirmal and his team began their descent from the summit of Cho Oyu, the silence was palpable. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie stillness. They trudged through the snow, their legs numb but their spirits high. The breathtaking view from the summit was etched in their minds, a memory they would cherish forever. As they made their way back to their camp, Nirmal's mind began to wander to the next challenge ahead. Manaslu loomed before them, a towering giant of ice and rock. The team's fatigue was evident, but Nirmal's focus never wavered. He knew that every mountain was a challenge, and every climb a risk. The snow fell gently around them, casting a serene blanket over the mountain. Tenzing and Pasang walked beside Nirmal, their eyes fixed on the ground ahead. They knew the terrain would grow more treacherous as they climbed higher. Nirmal's thoughts turned to the record they were trying to break. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that they had come too far to turn back now. As they neared the camp, the sound of snow falling grew louder. Nirmal quickened his pace, his eyes fixed on the tent in the distance. He knew they had to rest and refuel before tackling the next mountain. The team followed closely, their exhaustion evident in their slow pace. Nirmal led the way, his determination driving him forward. As Nirmal and his team settled into their camp, the weight of their accomplishment began to sink in. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional crackle of the stove and the soft murmur of their breathing. Tenzing and Pasang sat by the fire, their eyes fixed on the flames, a mixture of exhaustion and elation etched on their faces. Nirmal, ever the strategist, began to study the maps and weather forecasts, his mind racing with the logistics of the next leg of their journey. The snow fell gently around them, casting a serene blanket over the mountain. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of wood smoke and the faint tang of snow. Nirmal's gaze wandered to the peaks beyond the valley, their rugged contours a reminder of the challenges still to come. Manaslu loomed ahead, a towering giant of ice and rock, its summit shrouded in mist. As the team settled in for the night, Nirmal's thoughts turned to the record they were trying to break. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that they had come too far to turn back now. The fire crackled and spat, casting flickering shadows on the faces of his team. Nirmal's eyes narrowed, his mind already turning to the challenges of the next day. As the night wore on, Nirmal's mind continued to whirl with plans and strategies for the next leg of their journey. The team's fatigue was starting to show, and he knew they needed to refuel and rest before tackling Manaslu. He poured himself a cup of hot tea and sat down beside Tenzing and Pasang, who were staring into the flames, their faces etched with exhaustion and elation. "All right, team," Nirmal said, his voice low and steady. "Tomorrow's the big day. We need to make sure we're all fueled up and ready to go." He handed out cups of tea and handed out energy bars, his eyes scanning the team's faces. "We'll take a light breakfast, and then we're moving out at dawn. The weather forecast says there's a window of good weather for the next few days, so we need to make the most of it." Tenzing and Pasang nodded, their eyes still fixed on the flames, but Nirmal could see the spark of determination in their gazes. He knew they were ready for this. He took a sip of his tea, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. They had come too far to turn back now. The mountain loomed ahead, its summit shrouded in mist, but Nirmal was undaunted. He knew what lay ahead, and he was ready to face it head-on. As the sun began to rise on the third day of their ascent up Manaslu, Nirmal's team stirred from their slumber, their eyes bleary from the previous night's exertions. The air was crisp and cold, the snow crunching beneath their feet as they set out on the long journey to the summit. Nirmal led the way, his experienced eyes scanning the terrain ahead, searching for any signs of danger. Tenzing and Pasang followed closely, their faces set in determined expressions. The climb was grueling, the steep ice walls and treacherous rock faces pushing the team to their limits. Nirmal's legs ached, his lungs burning from the thin air, but he pressed on, his mind focused on the prize. The team's fatigue was starting to show, but Nirmal's leadership and encouragement kept them going, their spirits buoyed by the promise of a successful summit. As they climbed higher, the snow grew deeper, the winds picking up, threatening to sweep the team off their feet. Nirmal's eyes narrowed, his grip on his ice axe tightening as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The summit loomed ahead, shrouded in mist, but Nirmal was undaunted, his determination driving him forward, one step at a time. The team followed closely, their eyes fixed on the leader, as they pushed on towards the top of Manaslu. As Nirmal and his team crested the final ridge, the snow-capped peak of Manaslu unfolded before them like a majestic throne. The air was alive with an otherworldly silence, broken only by the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet. Tenzing and Pasang stood shoulder to shoulder with Nirmal, their faces set in determined expressions, as they gazed up at the mountain's towering summit. The mist-shrouded peak seemed to be calling to them, its icy fingers reaching out to claim them. Nirmal's eyes scanned the terrain, his mind racing with a final push to the summit. The winds were picking up, the snow swirling around their ankles, but he knew this was at the moment of truth. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their journey settle upon him, and began the final ascent. The team followed closely, their footsteps echoing off the mountain's flanks, as they battled their way up the treacherous ice walls and rock faces. The snow grew deeper, the winds howling around them, but Nirmal pressed on, his determination driving him forward, one step at a time. The summit loomed ahead, its mist-shrouded peak beckoning them closer. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert, as he led his team into the unknown. As Nirmal and his team reached the summit of Manaslu, a sense of elation washed over them. The breathtaking view of the surrounding mountains and valleys took their breath away, a fitting reward for their hard work and determination. The team hugged each other, tears of joy streaming down their faces as they gazed out at the endless expanse of snow and ice. Nirmal's eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the stunning vista, before returning to his team. They had done it. They had conquered one of the world's most formidable mountains. Tenzing and Pasing beamed with pride, their exhaustion forgotten in the face of their triumph. Nirmal smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and pride in his team. They had faced countless challenges and obstacles, but together they had overcome them. The team's bond had grown stronger with each passing day, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by their shared determination. As they stood on the summit, the wind whipping their faces, Nirmal's mind began to turn to the next challenge. The record was still to be broken, and the journey was far from over. He glanced at his watch, calculating the time and distance to the next mountain. The team's journey was far from over, and Nirmal was already planning their next move. The world's highest mountain still beckoned, and Nirmal was ready to answer the call. As Nirmal and his team basked in the glory of their Manaslu summit, the Tibetan plains unfolded before them like a canvas of endless possibility. The journey had been long and arduous, but the sense of accomplishment and camaraderie was palpable. Tenzing and Pasing were grinning from ear to ear, their faces etched with exhaustion and elation. Nirmal's eyes sparkled with a fire that seemed to burn brighter with each passing day. He was a man on a mission, driven by an insatiable hunger to conquer the world's highest peaks. As they gazed out at the breathtaking vista, the team's minds turned to the next challenge. Cho Oyu, the 8,201-meter giant, beckoned in the distance. The winds howled and the snow swirled, but Nirmal's resolve remained unshakable. He began to mentally prepare for the ascent, his eyes scanning the terrain, his mind racing with strategies and contingency plans. The team followed his lead, their faces set in determined expressions as they contemplated the daunting task ahead. The mountain loomed large, its icy summit shrouded in mist, but Nirmal was undaunted. He knew that every step, every moment, would be a battle against the elements and against himself. The question was, would his team be able to keep pace with his unyielding drive? Only time would tell. As Nirmal and his team began their descent from Manaslu's summit, the weight of their accomplishment settled in. The breathtaking view they had gazed upon just moments before now seemed almost surreal, a distant memory of a triumph yet to be fully comprehended. The team's exhaustion was palpable, their movements slow and deliberate as they made their way down the treacherous ice walls and rock faces. Nirmal's eyes scanned the terrain, his mind still racing with the strategies and contingency plans for the next mountain, Cho Oyu. As they descended, the team's spirits began to flag, their bodies screaming for rest and respite. But Nirmal remained steadfast, his determination driving him forward. He knew that the next mountain would be just as daunting, perhaps even more so. The winds howled and the snow swirled, threatening to sweep them off their feet at any moment. But Nirmal pressed on, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his heart pounding in his chest. The team followed his lead, their footsteps echoing off the mountain's flanks as they battled against the elements. Tenzing and Pasing walked beside him, their faces set in determined expressions, their eyes fixed on the path ahead. Nirmal could feel their fatigue, their doubts and fears, but he refused to acknowledge them. He knew that the next mountain was just around the corner, waiting to be conquered. As Nirmal and his team emerged from the darkness of Manaslu's descent, the faint outline of Cho Oyu's massive form rose before them like a specter of doom. The Tibetan plains seemed to stretch on forever, a seemingly endless expanse of snow and ice that threatened to swallow them whole. Nirmal's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with the strategies and contingency plans he had devised for the ascent. The winds howled and the snow swirled, but he remained steadfast, his determination driving him forward. Tenzing and Pasing walked beside him, their faces set in determined expressions, their eyes fixed on the path ahead. Nirmal could feel their fatigue, their doubts and fears, but he refused to acknowledge them. He knew that the next mountain was just around the corner, waiting to be conquered. The team's spirits were flagging, but Nirmal pressed on, his eyes fixed on the horizon. As they began their ascent, the mountain loomed above them, its icy summit shrouded in mist. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The team's footsteps echoed off the mountain's flanks, a rhythmic beat that seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of the mountain itself. Nirmal knew that they were in for the fight of their lives, but he was ready. He had faced impossible odds before, and he had always come out on top. As Nirmal and his team ascended Cho Oyu, the mountain's sheer scale became increasingly daunting. The ice walls towered above them, their rugged surfaces etched with crevices and seracs. The air was biting cold, the wind cutting through their layers with a ferocity that made every step a battle. Tenzing and Passing trudged beside him, their faces set in determined expressions, but even their usual stoic composure began to fray as the hours ticked by. Nirmal's eyes scanned the terrain, his mind racing with the strategies he had devised for the ascent. He knew that the mountains, notorious exposed to ridges and treacherous ice bridges, would be the greatest challenges. The team's fatigue was beginning to tell, their footsteps slower and more labored with every step. Nirmal's own body ached with a dull, creeping pain, but he pushed on, driven by a stubborn determination to conquer the mountain. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the snowfields as they climbed higher. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The team's spirits were flagging, but he refused to give in, his eyes fixed on the distant summit. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air, and the ice beneath their feet gave a sickening lurch. Nirmal's eyes snapped up, his gaze locking onto a yawning crevasse that stretched across the mountain's flank like an open wound. As Nirmal's gaze locked onto the yawning crevasse, his mind racing with the implications, Tenzing's voice cut through the tension. Nirmal, we need to be careful here. The ice is unstable, and one wrong step could send us tumbling into the abyss. Nirmal's eyes never left the crevasse, his jaw clenched in determination. He knew that every moment counted, and hesitation would be a luxury they couldn't afford. Passang's voice was laced with concern as he stepped forward, his eyes scanning the terrain. Nirmal, can you see the safe route to the left? Maybe we can avoid the crevasse altogether. Nirmal's gaze darted to Passang, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the risk. He knew that the left route was shorter, but it would add precious time to their ascent. The wind howled around them, the snow swirling in a maddening dance. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He knew that the team's safety was paramount, but he also knew that every moment wasted would bring them closer to their deadline. He made his decision, his voice firm and resolute. Passang, take the lead. We'll follow your route. The team nodded in unison, their faces set in determined expressions as they began to navigate the treacherous terrain. As Passang led the way, his crampons crunching into the ice, Nirmal's eyes never left the crevasse. The wind buffeted them, threatening to send them tumbling, but Passang's surefootedness kept them stable. Tenzing followed closely, his eyes scanning the terrain, his face set in a mask of concentration. Nirmal brought up the rear, his gaze fixed on the crevasse, his mind racing with the calculations. The left route proved to be a hair-raising challenge, the ice walls steep and treacherous. Passang's expertise was invaluable, his knowledge of the mountain's hidden dangers serving them well. Nirmal's body ached with fatigue, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had come too far to turn back now. As they climbed, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the mountain in a golden glow. The air grew colder, the wind biting with a ferocity that made Nirmal's skin prickle. Tenzing's voice cut through the silence, his words laced with a mix of excitement and trepidation. We're almost there, Nirmal. Can you see the summit in sight? Nirmal's gaze locked onto the distant peak, his heart pounding with anticipation. He could see the snowfields, the glaciers, the rugged landscape stretching out before them like a vast, frozen sea. As Nirmal gazed up at the distant summit, his heart swelled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The snowfields stretched out before him like a vast, frozen sea, the glaciers glinting in the fading light. He could see the outline of the mountain's distinctive pyramid shape, its peak shrouded in a veil of mist. The air was cold and still, the only sound the soft crunch of Passang's crampons on the ice. Tenzing's voice cut through the silence, his words laced with a mix of excitement and caution. We're getting close, Nirmal. The summit is within reach. Nirmal nodded, his eyes fixed on the prize. He could see the slope steepening, the ice walls growing steeper and more treacherous. Passang's lead was steady, his crampons biting into the ice with a reassuring crunch. As they climbed, the wind began to pick up, buffeting them with a fierce gust that sent Nirmal's hair whipping back. He squinted into the face of the wind, his eyes watering with salt spray. The summit loomed ahead, its snowfields glowing like a mirage in the fading light. Nirmal's heart pounded with anticipation, his body screaming with fatigue. He pushed on, driven by a stubborn determination to conquer the mountain. The world narrowed to a single point, the summit beckoning him like a siren's call. As they neared the summit, the wind howled with a ferocity that sent Nirmal's stomach lurching. Tenzing's voice cut through the din, his words steady and reassuring. "One more push, Nirmal. We're almost there." Nirmal nodded, his eyes fixed on the prize. Pasang's lead was steady, his crampons biting into the ice with a reassuring crunch. The snowfield stretched out before them like a vast, frozen sea, the glaciers glinting in the fading light. The air grew colder, the wind biting with a ferocity that made Nirmal's skin prickle. Tenzing's voice was a steady heartbeat, his words a reminder that they were close. Nirmal's body ached with fatigue, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had come too far to turn back now. As they climbed, the summit loomed ahead, its snowfields glowing like a mirage in the fading light. Nirmal's heart pounded with anticipation, his eyes watering with salt spray. The wind buffeted them, threatening to send them tumbling, but Pasang's surefootedness kept them stable. Tenzing's face was set in a mask of concentration, his eyes fixed on the prize. Nirmal's gaze locked onto the summit, his mind racing with the thought of standing on the highest peak in the world. One more step, and they would reach the top. As they took their final step onto the summit, the wind died down, and an eerie silence fell over the mountain. Nirmal's eyes welled up with tears, his gaze sweeping across the breathtaking vista before him. The snowfields stretched out in every direction, a vast expanse of white that seemed to glow in the fading light. Tenzing and Pasang stood beside him, their faces etched with exhaustion and elation. Nirmal's mind reeled with the magnitude of their achievement. They had done the impossible, pushing the boundaries of human endurance to the very limit. The weight of his accomplishment threatened to overwhelm him, but he stood tall, his chest heaving with exertion. As he gazed out at the breathtaking view, Nirmal felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that he had never felt before. He thought of all the people who had supported him on this journey, all the sacrifices he had made, and all the challenges he had overcome. He knew that this moment was not just about him, but about the thousands of people who had believed in him, even when he had doubted himself. With a sense of quiet satisfaction, Nirmal turned to his team, a faint smile on his lips. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, a testament to the power of human determination and the unbreakable spirit of adventure. As they stood on the summit, the wind slowly dying down, Nirmal's gaze swept across the breathtaking vista before him. The snowfields stretched out in every direction, a vast expanse of white that seemed to glow in the fading light. Tenzing and Pasang stood beside him, their faces etched with exhaustion and elation. Nirmal's mind reeled with the magnitude of their achievement, the weight of which threatened to overwhelm him. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, and turned to his team. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, a testament to the power of human determination and the unbreakable spirit of adventure. Tenzing smiled, his eyes shining with pride, while Pasang's face broke into a wide grin. As they stood there, basking in the glow of their triumph, Nirmal's thoughts turned to the journey ahead. They had to make their way back down the mountain, navigating treacherous ice walls and steep slopes. The descent would be just as challenging as the ascent, and Nirmal knew that they had to be careful. He glanced at Tenzing and Pasang, their faces set with determination, and nodded. "Let's get moving," he said, his voice firm and resolute. With a deep breath, they began their descent, the snowfields stretching out before them like a vast, frozen sea. As they began their descent, the snowfields seemed to stretch on forever, a vast expanse of white that swallowed the small group whole. Nirmal led the way, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, his crampons biting into the ice with a reassuring crunch. Tenzing and Pasang followed closely behind, their faces set with determination, their breathing labored in the thin air. The wind had died down, but the silence was oppressive, a reminder of the enormity of their achievement. Nirmal's thoughts turned to the journey ahead, the treacherous ice walls and steep slopes that lay in wait. He knew that they had to be careful, that one misstep could prove disastrous. But for now, he pushed the doubts aside, focusing on the task at hand. The snowfields glinted in the fading light, a frozen sea that seemed to stretch on forever. As they climbed down, the group's pace slowed, each step a deliberate, measured movement. Nirmal's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of danger, but the landscape seemed peaceful, the only sound the soft crunch of crampons on ice. The silence was oppressive, a reminder of the weight of their accomplishment, but Nirmal's spirit remained unbroken, his determination driving him forward, one step at a time. As they descended, the snowfield seemed to stretch on forever, a vast expanse of white that swallowed the small group whole. Nirmal led the way, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, his crampons biting into the ice with a reassuring crunch. Tenzing and Pasang followed closely behind, their faces set with determination, their breathing labored in the thin air. The silence was oppressive, a reminder of the enormity of their achievement. Nirmal's thoughts turned to the journey ahead, the treacherous ice walls and steep slopes that lay in wait. He knew that they had to be careful, that one misstep could prove disastrous. But for now, he pushed the doubts aside, focusing on the task at hand. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, the group's pace slowed, each step a deliberate, measured movement. Nirmal's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of danger, but the landscape seemed peaceful, the only sound the soft crunch of crampons on ice. Suddenly, Pasang called out, his voice low and urgent. "Nirmal, look!" he exclaimed, pointing to a patch of dark ice ahead. Nirmal followed his gaze, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the ominous sign of Serac formation, a sign that the ice was beginning to collapse. He nodded grimly, his eyes locked on the danger ahead. As Nirmal's gaze locked onto the ominous sign of Serac formation, his heart sank. He knew that the ice was beginning to collapse, and they had to act fast. He swiftly assessed the situation, his mind racing with options. The group's pace had slowed to a crawl, and the silence was now oppressive. Nirmal's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of safety, but the snowfields seemed to stretch on forever. Tenzing and Pasang exchanged worried glances, their faces set with concern. Nirmal's voice cut through the stillness, calm and steady. "Pasang, can you make your way to the left? About 20 feet away, there's a small ledge that should provide some protection." Pasang nodded, his face set in a determined expression. "I'll go, Nirmal. You stay here and keep an eye on the ice." Nirmal nodded, his eyes never leaving the Serac formation. He knew that every second counted, and one misstep could prove disastrous. With a deep breath, Pasang began his precarious journey to the left, his crampons biting into the ice. Nirmal watched, his heart pounding in his chest, as the Serac formation began to shudder and tremble. The air was thick with tension, and Nirmal's senses were on high alert, waiting for the inevitable collapse. The silence was oppressive, and the only sound was the soft crunch of crampons on ice. As the Serac formation continued to shudder and tremble, Nirmal's eyes never left the danger ahead. Pasang's footsteps echoed through the stillness, each step a deliberate, measured movement. The sound of his crampons biting into the ice was a stark contrast to the ominous silence surrounding them. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert, waiting for the inevitable collapse. Suddenly, Pasang's voice cut through the stillness, his words barely above a whisper. "Nirmal, I'm on the ledge. The ice is collapsing, but it's holding for now." Nirmal's gaze flicked to Pasang, his eyes locking onto the small ledge that had provided a temporary reprieve. He nodded, his voice steady. "Good. Tenzing, can you make your way to the left? About 10 feet away? We need to get out of the direct path of the collapse." The silence was oppressive, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. Nirmal's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of safety, but the snowfields seemed to stretch on forever. Tenzing nodded, his face set with determination, and began his precarious journey to the left. Nirmal watched, his heart still racing with tension, as the Serac formation continued to shudder and tremble, its fate hanging precariously in the balance. As Tenzing reached the left side of the Serac formation, Nirmal could see the look of relief on his face. Pasang, still on the small ledge, was watching him with a mixture of concern and gratitude. Nirmal's eyes never left the ice, his gaze fixed on the spot where the Serac was beginning to collapse. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the soft crunch of crampons on ice. Tenzing's voice cut through the stillness, his words calm and steady. "Nirmal, I'm on the other side. The ice is collapsing, but it's not going to take us with it." Nirmal nodded, his eyes never leaving the Serac. He knew that they had to move quickly, but he also knew that they couldn't afford to rush. The snowfields were treacherous, and one wrong step could prove disastrous. The Serac continued to shudder and tremble, its fate hanging precariously in the balance. Nirmal's heart was racing with tension, his senses on high alert. He knew that they were running out of time, and that every second counted. With a deep breath, he began to make his way to the left, his crampons biting into the ice. The group's pace was slow and deliberate, each step a calculated movement. The silence was oppressive, but Nirmal knew that they were almost safe. As Nirmal stepped onto the small ledge, Pasang's voice echoed through the stillness. "Nirmal, the ice is collapsing, but it's holding for now." The weight of their situation pressed down on them, the silence oppressive. Nirmal's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of safety, but the snowfields seemed to stretch on forever. Tenzing, still on the left side of the Serac formation, began his slow and deliberate journey towards them. The group's pace was slow and calculated, each step a measured movement. The crunch of crampons on ice was the only sound, a stark contrast to the ominous silence surrounding them. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert, waiting for the inevitable collapse. The Serac continued to shudder and tremble, its fate hanging precariously in the balance. Tenzing reached the group, his face set with concern. "Nirmal, we need to move," he said, his voice low and steady. Nirmal nodded, his eyes never leaving the Serac. "Pasang, can you move a little further to the left? We need to get out of the direct path of the collapse." Pasang nodded, his eyes locked onto Nirmal's, and began to make his way to the left, his crampons biting into the ice. The group's movement was slow and deliberate, each step a calculated movement, as they waited for the Serac to collapse and then make their next move. As the group waited, the Serac's tremors intensified, the air thickening with anticipation. Nirmal's eyes locked onto Pasang, who was now about 5 feet away, his crampons digging into the ice. Tenzing stood to Pasang's right, his gaze fixed on Nirmal, his expression a mixture of concern and focus. The silence was oppressive, the only sound the soft crunch of crampons on ice. Suddenly, Pasang's voice cut through the stillness. "Nirmal, I'm moving now. Give me a few seconds." Nirmal nodded, his eyes never leaving Pasang's face. Tenzing's voice was low and steady. "We need to stay calm, Nirmal. We can get through this." The group held its collective breath as Pasang began to move further to the left, his movements slow and deliberate. Nirmal's gaze followed Pasang's, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of safety. The Serac continued to shudder and tremble, its fate hanging precariously in the balance. Tenzing's voice was calm, reassuring. "We're almost out of the direct path, Nirmal. Just a few more feet." The group waited, its tension palpable as Pasang moved closer to the edge of the ledge. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert, waiting for the inevitable collapse. The Serac's tremors intensified, the air thickening with anticipation as the group waited, frozen in silence. As Pasang reached the edge of the ledge, Nirmal gave a subtle nod, his eyes never leaving the Serac. The group held its collective breath, the silence oppressive. Pasang's crampons dug into the ice as he began to make his way across, his movements slow and deliberate. Tenzing stood to Pasang's right, his gaze fixed on Nirmal, his expression a mixture of concern and focus. The Serac continued to shudder and tremble, its fate hanging precariously in the balance. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert, waiting for the inevitable collapse. But Pasang moved steadily across, his eyes locked onto Nirmal's, a silent communication passing between them. Tenzing's voice was low and steady. "We're almost clear, Nirmal. Just a few more feet." The group waited, its tension palpable, as Pasang inched closer to the far side of the ledge. Nirmal took a deep breath, his gaze scanning the horizon for any sign of safety. The Serac's tremors intensified, the air thickening with anticipation. Suddenly, Pasang's foot slipped on the ice, but he quickly regained his balance, his crampons biting into the surface. Nirmal's eyes narrowed, his grip on the ice knife tightening as he watched Pasang's every move, his focus on the task at hand. As Pasang finally reached the far side of the ledge, the group exhaled a collective sigh of relief. The Serac's tremors began to subside, and the air slowly returned to normal. Nirmal's eyes never left Pasang's face, his gaze assessing the situation before turning to Tenzing. "We need to move," he said, his voice low and steady. "We can't stay here." Tenzing nodded, his expression a mixture of concern and focus. "I'm on it, Nirmal." He began to move forward, his crampons biting into the ice. Nirmal followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of safety. The group moved swiftly but deliberately, each step a calculated movement. As they rounded the Serac, the wind picked up, and the snow swirled around them. Nirmal's face was set in a determined expression, his jaw clenched against the biting cold. The group trudged on, their pace relentless, driven by the knowledge that they had to keep moving if they were to survive. The Serac loomed behind them, its massive bulk a reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. But Nirmal refused to be intimidated. He led the way, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his heart pounding with anticipation. The snowfield stretched out before them, a seemingly endless expanse of white. As they ventured deeper into the snowfields, Nirmal's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The wind howled around them, threatening to engulf them in its icy grip. Tenzing trudged alongside, his crampons biting into the snow, his expression a mask of concentration. Pasang walked a few feet behind, his eyes fixed on Nirmal, a silent communication passing between them. The Serac loomed behind them, its massive bulk a constant reminder of the risks they'd face. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert, waiting for any sign of instability. The snowfields stretched out before them, a seemingly endless expanse of white, their footprints the only sign of life. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner, the cold more biting. Nirmal's breath misted in the chill air, his voice low and steady as he directed the group forward. "Stay close, stay alert," he warned, his eyes darting between the team members. Tenzing nodded, his expression unyielding, while Paseng kept pace beside him, his eyes locked onto Nirmal's. The snowfields seemed to stretch on forever, a seemingly endless expanse of white that threatened to swallow them whole. Nirmal's determination remained unshaken, his focus fixed on the summit ahead. He knew the risks, but he also knew they couldn't turn back now, not when they were so close. As the group continued on, the snowfields unfolding before them like a vast, white canvas, Nirmal's gaze never wavered from the horizon. The wind howled around them, threatening to engulf them in its icy grip, but he pressed on, his determination unshaken. The team trudged on, their pace relentless, driven by the knowledge that they had to keep moving if they were to survive. Tenzing's crampons bit into the snow, his expression a mask of concentration, while Paseng walked a few feet behind, his eyes fixed on Nirmal, a silent communication passing between them. The serac loomed behind them, its massive bulk a constant reminder of the risks they'd faced. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert, waiting for any sign of instability. Suddenly, Tenzing's voice cut through the wind, his words low and steady. "Nirmal, I'm picking up some movement in the ice. It's not stable." Nirmal's eyes snapped towards Tenzing, his grip on his ice knife tightening. He scanned the horizon, his gaze searching for any sign of danger. The snowfields seemed to stretch on forever, a seemingly endless expanse of white that threatened to swallow them whole. Nirmal's jaw clenched, his mind racing with the implications. He knew they couldn't afford to stop now, not when they were so close. As Tenzing's words hung in the air, Nirmal's gaze locked onto the serac, his mind racing with the implications. He could see the subtle signs of instability, the faint tremors in the ice that could spell disaster. The team's eyes followed his, their faces set with concern. Paseng's hand instinctively went to the harness, as if preparing for the worst. Tenzing's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Nirmal's grip on his ice knife tightened, his fingers flexing as he assessed the situation. He knew they couldn't afford to stop now, not when they were so close. The wind howled around them, the snow swirled, and the ice creaked. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert. He took a deep breath, his mind racing with options. They needed to find a safe route, a way to bypass the unstable ice. He scanned the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of a path. The snowfields stretched out before them, a seemingly endless expanse of white. Nirmal's jaw clenched, his determination unwavering. He would not let his team down. Not now, not when they were so close. With a quiet command, he turned to Tenzin. "Find a way around it," he said, his voice low and steady. As Tenzin began to scan the horizon for a safe route, Nirmal's eyes never left the serac, his mind racing with the implications of the unstable ice. The team's silence was palpable, their faces set with concern as they waited for Tenzing's assessment. Paseng's hand remained on the harness, his eyes fixed on Nirmal, as if ready to intervene at a moment's notice. The wind howled around them, the snow swirled, and the ice creaked, the sound echoing through the stillness like a death knell. Tenzing's voice was low and steady as he spoke. "I see a narrow crevasse to our left, Nirmal. It's narrow, but it looks like it might be stable." Nirmal's gaze flicked to the crevasse, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the risk. He knew they couldn't afford to take a chance, not now. The team waited, their breath misting in the cold air. As Nirmal weighed the options, he could see the doubt in Tenzing's eyes, the flicker of uncertainty that could spell disaster. Nirmal's jaw clenched, his determination unwavering. He knew what they had to do. With a quiet command, he turned to the team, his voice low and steady. "Let's move, but stay close. We need to get through this crevasse quickly and quietly." The team nodded, their faces set with resolve, as they began to move towards the crevasse, their eyes fixed on the narrow opening in the ice. As the team crept through the narrow crevasse, the sound of creaking ice echoed behind them, a constant reminder of the risks they'd taken. Nirmal's eyes scanned the darkness, his gaze adjusting to the dim light, as he led the way. The air was thick with the smell of snow and ice, the cold seeping into their bones. Tenzing's crampons clicked on the ice, his pace steady, while Paseng followed closely, his eyes fixed on Nirmal's back. The wind howled outside, the serac looming in the distance, its massive bulk a constant threat. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert, as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The crevasse twisted and turned, the ice walls looming on either side, before finally spilling out onto a wider expanse of snow. As they emerged into the bright sunlight, Nirmal squinted, his eyes watering from the intensity of the glare. The snow stretched out before them, a seemingly endless expanse of white, the peaks of the surrounding mountains rising up like giants. Nirmal's gaze locked onto the summit, his determination unwavering, as he assessed their next move. The team's faces were set with resolve, their eyes fixed on the prize, as they trudged forward, their pace relentless, driven by the knowledge that they had to keep moving if they were to survive. As the team emerged from the crevasse, Nirmal's gaze locked onto the summit, his eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of danger. The snow stretched out before them, a seemingly endless expanse of white, the peaks of the surrounding mountains rising up like giants. Tenzing and Pasang followed closely, their crampons clicking on the ice as they trudged forward. The wind howled around them, the serac looming in the distance, its massive bulk a constant threat. Nirmal's eyes narrowed as he spotted a steep slope ahead, the ice slick with fresh snow. He knew they had to be careful, the risk of sliding or falling was high. With a quiet command, he turned to the team, his voice low and steady. "Stay close, Pasang. Tenzing, you're with me." The two climbers moved forward, their pace slow and deliberate, as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The snow crunched beneath their feet, the only sound in the stillness. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert, as he led the way. The summit loomed ahead, a tantalizing prize that seemed within reach, but Nirmal knew the journey was far from over. The final push would be the hardest, the last test of their endurance and determination. He steeled himself for the challenge ahead, his eyes fixed on the prize. As Nirmal and Tenzing made their way up the steep slope, the snow grew deeper and the ice slicker. Nirmal's eyes darted back and forth, searching for any sign of instability. The wind howled around them, threatening to sweep them off balance. Pasang followed closely, his crampons biting into the ice as he struggled to keep pace. The snow crunched beneath their feet, the only sound in the stillness. Nirmal's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert. He knew they were taking a risk, but he also knew they had to push on. The summit was within reach, and he was determined to see it through. As they climbed higher, the air grew colder and thinner. Nirmal's lungs burned, his legs aching with fatigue, but he refused to give in, drawing on every last ounce of strength to propel himself forward. Tenzing followed closely, his eyes fixed on Nirmal's back as he struggled to keep up. The slope grew steeper, the ice more treacherous. Nirmal's foot slipped on a patch of black ice, but he caught himself just in time. He gritted his teeth, his muscles screaming in protest. The team waited, their faces set with concern, as Nirmal steadied himself and pressed on. The summit was just a few hundred feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. As Nirmal and Tenzing crested the slope, the wind buffeted them, threatening to send them tumbling. Nirmal's eyes locked onto the summit, his determination unwavering, as he led the way. The snow crunched beneath their feet, the only sound in the stillness. Tenzing followed closely, his crampons biting into the ice as he struggled to keep pace. The air grew colder and thinner, Nirmal's lungs burning with each breath. His legs ached with fatigue, but he refused to give in, drawing on every last ounce of strength to propel himself forward. Tenzing followed closely, his eyes fixed on Nirmal's back as he struggled to keep up. The slope grew steeper, the ice more treacherous. Nirmal's foot slipped on a patch of black ice, but he caught himself just in time. He gritted his teeth, his muscles screaming in protest. The team waited, their faces set with concern, as Nirmal steadied himself and pressed on. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed into them, sending Nirmal stumbling. He regained his balance, his heart racing as he looked up at the summit. The wind howled around them, threatening to stop them in their tracks. But Nirmal refused to yield. With a fierce cry, he launched himself up the final slope, Tenzing at his heels. The snow swirled around them, a maddening vortex of white and blue, as they hurtled towards the summit. As Nirmal and Tenzing burst onto the summit, the wind howled around them, threatening to sweep them off balance. But they stood tall, their faces set with determination, their eyes fixed on the breathtaking view below. The snow swirled around them, a maddening vortex of white and blue, as they gazed out at the endless expanse of Himalayan peaks. Nirmal's eyes shone with a fierce light, his face etched with exhaustion and elation. He raised his arms in triumph, his voice hoarse from shouting up the final slope. Tenzing followed suit, his own voice lost in the wind as he let out a triumphant roar. The team waited, their faces set with concern, as Nirmal and Tenzing stood on the summit, basking in the glory of their achievement. Pasang joined them soon after, his own face a picture of exhaustion and relief. Together, they gazed out at the breathtaking view, their eyes drinking in the beauty of the Himalayas. For a moment, they forgot about the challenges they had faced, the risks they had taken, and the sacrifices they had made. All that mattered was the sense of triumph, of achievement, of standing on the roof of the world. As Nirmal and Tenzing stood on the summit, basking in the glory of their achievement, they knew their journey was far from over. The wind still howled around them, threatening to sweep them off balance, but they reveled in the challenge. They took turns embracing, their faces etched with exhaustion and elation, as they tried to absorb the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. Pasang joined them soon after, his own face a picture of exhaustion and relief. Together, the three friends gazed out at the breathtaking view, their eyes drinking in the beauty of the Himalayas. For a moment, they forgot about the challenges they had faced, the risks they had taken, and the sacrifices they had made. All that mattered was the sense of triumph, of achievement, of standing on the roof of the world. As they stood there, taking it all in, Nirmal pulled out a small device from his pocket and pressed play. The sound of a cheering crowd, the camera's shutter clicking, and the faint hum of the satellite phone filled the air. It was a message from the world outside, congratulating them on their achievement. Nirmal's eyes sparkled with pride as he looked at Tenzing and Pasang, his friends and partners in this incredible journey. They had done it. They had stood on the summit of all 14 peaks, and nothing could ever take that away from them. As the cheering crowd's congratulations continued to fill the air, Nirmal, Tenzing, and Pasang shared a moment of stunned silence, their faces aglow with the weight of their achievement. The satellite phone's hum had become a distant murmur, a reminder of the world beyond their mountainous realm. The three friends stood frozen, their eyes locked on the breathtaking vista before them, as if unwilling to let the moment truly sink in. Tenzing, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break the silence, his voice low and measured. "We did it, lads. We actually did it." Pasang's face broke into a wide grin, his eyes shining with tears of joy. Nirmal, still lost in the haze of elation, simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The wind, which had threatened to sweep them off balance mere moments before, now seemed to carry a new significance, as if it too were rejoicing in their triumph. The three friends stood there, basking in the glory of their achievement, their hearts still racing from the exertion. And yet, even as they savored this moment, they knew that their journey was far from over. The next step, the next challenge, was already waiting for them, like a siren's call on the wind. As the silence between them stretched, Nirmal's gaze drifted to the horizon, his eyes tracing the contours of the mountains. The wind, now a gentle whisper, carried the distant rumble of avalanches and the soft chirping of snow lemmings. Tenzing, ever the pragmatist, began to pack up the satellite phone, his movements economical and precise. Pasang, still beaming with exhaustion and elation, stumbled towards the summit's edge, his eyes drinking in the breathtaking view. Nirmal watched as Pasang collapsed onto a boulder, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The three friends stood in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet. The weight of their achievement began to settle in, like a gentle snowfall on the high peaks. They knew that their journey was far from over, that the next challenge was already waiting for them. Tenzing, ever the voice of reason, spoke up, his voice low and measured. "We need to get down from here, lads. The weather's changing, and we can't stay here all night." Nirmal nodded, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. Pasang, still grinning, rose to his feet, his movements slow and deliberate. Together, the three friends set off down the mountain, their footsteps echoing through the stillness, as they began their journey back to civilization. As they made their way down the mountain, the weight of their achievement began to settle in. The wind, which had been a constant companion throughout their journey, now seemed to carry a new significance. Tenzing's practicality was a welcome respite from the euphoria that still lingered in the air. He led the way, his eyes scanning the terrain for any signs of danger. Nirmal followed closely, his mind still reeling from the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Pasang, still grinning from ear to ear, lagged behind, his exhaustion evident in every step. The three friends moved in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet. As they descended, the air grew thick with the scent of wet earth and ozone. The snow lemmings' soft chirping grew louder, a reminder that even in the midst of human drama, the natural world continued to thrive. The mountains loomed above them, their peaks shrouded in mist. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the landscape. Tenzing stopped suddenly, his hand raised in a gesture of caution. "Wait," he whispered, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. Nirmal's heart skipped a beat as he followed Tenzing's gaze. What lay ahead, only time would tell. As they continued down the mountain, the silence between them began to feel oppressive, like a heavy blanket draped over their shoulders. Nimble couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the mountains themselves were waiting to see what they would do next. Tenzing's voice broke the spell, his practicality a welcome respite from the unease that had settled over them. "We need to get back to base camp," he said, his eyes scanning the terrain for any signs of danger. "We can't stay out here all night." Pasang nodded, his grin still plastered on his face, but Nimble could see the exhaustion etched on his features. They trudged on, their footsteps echoing through the stillness, the only sound in a world that seemed to be holding its breath. The air grew colder, the wind picking up, and Nimble could see his breath misting in the air. Suddenly, Tenzing stopped, his hand raised in a gesture of caution. "Wait," he whispered, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. Nimble's heart skipped a beat as he followed Tenzing's gaze. What lay ahead, only time would tell. The mountains seemed to loom over them, their peaks shrouded in mist, as if they too were waiting to see what would happen next. As they paused, Tenzing's gaze swept the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of danger. Nimble followed his lead, scanning the terrain for any indication of what lay ahead. Pasang, meanwhile, stood frozen, his grin still plastered on his face, but his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear. The wind buffeted them, sending snow swirling around their feet. Tenzing's hand tightened on Nimble's shoulder, a subtle warning to stay alert. Pasang's eyes darted back and forth, his face pale in the fading light. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the mountain slope. Nimble's mind reeled with the implications of what they had just seen. The mountains seemed to be watching them, their peaks shrouded in mist like sentinels guarding a secret. Tenzing's voice cut through the silence, his tone low and urgent. "We need to move, now. The storm is coming in fast." Pasang's grin faltered, replaced by a look of alarm. Nimble's heart sank, a sense of unease creeping over him. They knew the mountains, but the mountains knew them too. And now, it seemed, the storm was coming for them. As the storm closed in, Tenzing's grip on Nimble's shoulder tightened, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The wind howled around them, sending snow swirling in a maddening dance. Pasang's eyes were wide with fear, his face pale in the fading light. Tenzing's voice was low and urgent, his words barely audible over the storm. "We need to find shelter, now. The avalanche risk is high." Nimble's heart was racing, his mind reeling with the implications of their situation. The mountains seemed to be closing in around them, their peaks shrouded in mist like sentinels guarding a secret. He followed Tenzing's lead, his eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of safety. Pasang lagged behind, his legs trembling beneath him. The storm raged on, its fury unabated. Tenzing's voice was a steady beat, guiding them through the chaos. "Stay close, Pasang. We need to move, now." Nimble's feet felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. He forced himself to move, to keep pace with Tenzing's steady stride. The snow was knee-deep, the wind biting at their faces. They were making slow progress, but Tenzing's eyes never wavered, his gaze fixed on some point ahead. Nimble followed, his heart pounding in his chest, as they battled against the storm. As they stumbled through the storm, Nimble's thoughts were consumed by the uncertainty of their situation. The winds howled around them, threatening to tear them apart, while the snow swirled in a maddening dance, reducing visibility to mere feet. Pasang's trembling had become more pronounced, his legs buckling beneath him as he struggled to keep pace with Tenzing's steady stride. Nimble's own legs felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot, but he forced himself to move, driven by a desperate need to reach safety. The storm raged on, its fury unabated, as Tenzing expertly navigated the treacherous terrain. His eyes were fixed on some point ahead, his gaze unwavering despite the blinding snow and wind. Nimble followed, his heart pounding in his chest, as they battled against the tempest. The air was biting, the cold seeping into their bones, but Nimble barely registered the pain, his focus solely on reaching the relative safety of the next valley. Suddenly, Tenzing's voice cut through the howling wind, his words barely audible over the storm. "We're almost there, Nimble," he shouted, his eyes locked on some point ahead, just a little farther. Nimble's heart leapt with hope, his legs propelling him forward with renewed energy. But as they rounded a bend in the mountain slope, a flash of white caught his eye, sending a shiver down his spine. What lay ahead? Was it safety, or something far more sinister? As they rounded the bend, the flash of white Nimble saw took the form of a massive snow wall, blocking their path. The storm raged on, the wind and snow swirling around them in a maddening dance. Tenzing's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on the wall as if searching for a weakness. Nimble followed his lead, his heart sinking as he realized the danger they faced. The snow wall was too high to climb, and the wind was too strong to push through. We need to find another way, Tenzing shouted above the storm, his voice barely audible. Nimble nodded, his mind racing with the implications of their situation. They couldn't go back, and they couldn't climb the wall. Paseng's eyes were wide with fear, his face pale in the fading light. Tenzing's hand tightened on Nimmel's shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. The storm raged on, the snow and wind battering them from all sides. Nimmel's eyes scanned the terrain, searching for any sign of a way around the wall, but there was nothing, just a seemingly endless expanse of white and gray. The snow wall loomed before them, a solid barrier that threatened to trap them forever. Tenzing's eyes never wavered, his gaze fixed on the wall as if searching for a solution. As Tenzing's gaze continued to scan the snow wall, Nimmel's eyes followed his lead, searching for any weakness or gap in the barrier. The storm raged on, the wind and snow swirling around them in a maddening dance, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of them. Paseng's fear was palpable, his eyes wide with terror as he clung to Tenzing's arm, his face pale in the fading light. Tenzing's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched in concentration as he searched for a solution. Nimmel's mind was racing, his thoughts consumed by the impossibility of their situation. They couldn't climb the wall, and they couldn't go back. The snow wall seemed to stretch on forever, a solid barrier that threatened to trap them forever. As the storm showed no signs of abating, Tenzing's voice cut through the howling wind, his words barely audible. "I think I see a possible route," he shouted, his eyes fixed on a small crevice in the wall. "If we can make it to that gap, we might be able to slide down and find shelter." Nimmel's heart leapt with hope, his legs propelling him forward with renewed energy. But as they began to move towards the crevice, Paseng's grip on Tenzing's arm tightened, his eyes fixed on the wall with a mixture of fear and desperation. As they edged closer to the crevice, Tenzing's voice remained steady, guiding Nimmel through the treacherous terrain. Paseng's fear was palpable, his legs trembling beneath him as he struggled to keep pace. The snow wall loomed above, its icy surface reflecting the faint light of the setting sun. Nimmel's heart pounded in his chest, his senses heightened as he scanned the terrain for any sign of danger. The crevice seemed impossibly narrow, a thread-like gap between the snow wall and the mountain slope. Tenzing's eyes locked onto the opening, his jaw set in determination. "Keep moving, Nimmel," he urged, his voice low and steady. "We need to get through this gap before the storm gets worse." Nimmel's legs propelled him forward, his eyes fixed on the crevice as he navigated the treacherous terrain. Paseng's grip on Tenzing's arm tightened, his face pale with fear. The wind howled around them, threatening to rip them apart as they inched closer to the gap. Tenzing's voice remained steady, guiding Nimmel through the darkness. "Almost there," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the crevice. "Just a little farther." Nimmel's heart leapt with hope, his legs pumping harder as he pushed through the snow. But just as they were about to reach the gap, a loud crack echoed through the valley, making Nimmel's heart skip a beat. As Nimmel and Tenzing pushed through the snow, the crack echoed again, this time louder and closer. Paseng's grip on Tenzing's arm tightened, his eyes wide with fear. Nimmel's heart skipped a beat, his mind racing with the possibility of an avalanche. Tenzing's voice remained steady, but a hint of urgency crept into his tone. "Stay still, Nimmel," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the crevice. "Let's see if it's just a falling snowflake." The wind buffeted them, threatening to send them tumbling. But Tenzing's hand remained firm on Nimmel's shoulder, his grip a steady anchor in the chaos. Paseng's face was ashen, his eyes fixed on the wall as if willing the snow to part. The crack echoed again, this time a loud, sharp sound that made Nimmel's ears ring. Tenzing's eyes locked onto the crevice, his jaw set in determination. "It's not a landslide," he said, his voice firm. "It's just the storm trying to keep us out." Nimmel's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert. He knew that one misstep could send them tumbling into the abyss. But Tenzing's voice remained a steady beacon, guiding him through the treacherous terrain. As they slipped through the crevice, Nimmel's legs trembled beneath him, the icy surface threatening to send him tumbling. Tenzing's firm hand on his shoulder was a lifeline, guiding him through the treacherous terrain. Paseng's grip on Tenzing's arm was a steady anchor, his eyes fixed on the wall as if willing the snow to part. The crack echoed again, a sharp sound that made Nimmel's ears ring. Tenzing's eyes locked onto the crevice, his jaw set in determination. "We're almost through," he whispered, his voice a steady counterpoint to the howling wind. Nimmel's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert. He knew that one misstep could send them tumbling into the abyss. As they emerged on the other side, the storm seemed to part, revealing a narrow ledge that wound its way up the mountain slope. Tenzing's voice cut through the silence, his words barely audible over the wind. "We need to keep moving," he urged, his eyes fixed on the ledge. Nimmal's legs propelled him forward, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. Pasang's face was pale, his eyes fixed on Tenzing's face, but his grip on Tenzing's arm remained steady. They moved as one, their footsteps echoing off the snow wall as they continued their perilous journey.